We'll just start laughing. No problem. Everybody's already left. With the inside jokes. It's great.
Why are these two laughing again?
Why are they starting right from the beginning of the damn video? I don't understand.
Fire and ice.
Okay.
That was my fire. Did you like that? I don't know what you're doing for ice, but
I just like a square.
oh, I like that. Yeah,
more voguing than square, I guess.
I
But
like it.
anyway, welcome back, people. Fire and ice. We're at it again.
Here we are.
I think we missed a month, but that's okay. It's been a busy month.
Yeah, it has been a busy month.
So today we're going to have a little bit of I think what is a meandering conversation, because I will frame this for you. And by the way, if you do not, damn it,
Oh,
if you're not aware, this is Lauren Rosen. She is at The Obsessive Mind on Instagram. You should check her out 100%.
And if you're following, or if you're coming here from my page, go follow Drew Linsalata, the.anxious.truth. He's amazing. He's on Instagram. He's got a YouTube channel. Well, you know that because you're here. And, you know, he writes books. He's awesome.
Yeah, whatever comes to mind at the time is what I do. So a couple of, I guess it was last week. So Lauren and Kelley Franke, who's another really great, you should follow. She's the
OCD therapist.
Yeah,
and she's fabulous.
Kelley from the screen too. Kelley is awesome. I know Kelley, and I know you guys are BFFs. So Kelley and Lauren do a podcast called Purely OCD, which
that's
is great.
Right.
Check it out. I'll link that also. And that's part of your live streams that you do every week or every other week, or whatever, on Instagram.
Exactly. So we record live on Instagram, and we have a little bit of back and forth with people who are tuning in and who have questions, and then then we put it on podcast apps for.
So check that out. I will link that in the video description if you watch on the YouTube, so you guys can check out that podcast. It's really good. And Kelley is awesome too. So last week I happened to pop in to your Instagram live, which I rarely get to do, but that was a bit of a treat. And it was just, bear with me here. So Lauren and Kelley go back and forth, and they're talking about how they can support each other, because both of you guys have experience with your own OCD, right?
Yes.
Both specializing now in treating OCD. What a surprise, right? So, and good friends. So when they support each other, and at one point, I don't even know if it was you or it was Kelley who said this, I think
it was Kelley.
Yeah. Right? And it was, they're sort of talking about the conversations that they may have where you guys are kind of supporting each other, bringing your struggles to each other. And it was Kelley who said, well, sometimes I just have to think and say, can I offer you a reframe? Would you like exposure? And I don't know why it struck me as, here are these two OCD specialists with their own struggles with OCD helping each other out. Can I offer you a reframe? Which just struck me as odd, because that is like the OCD equivalent of, can I get you something to eat? Such a strange. And I wanted to explore that today. Can I offer you a reframe?
Yeah. And why that's important.
And why that's important. Yeah. So Kelley's exact statement was, can I offer you a reframe? Would you like an exposure? So that was exactly, can I get you something to eat? Are you hungry? Explain what she meant there. So if you're let's say you're bringing a little issue to Kelley, you're struggling with your OCD, is flared up a little bit, and you bring it to Kelley as a friend.
Yeah. Yeah.
And she says that. What is she talking about?
So what she's talking about is essentially like, okay, have you already gone over this in your mind rationally? That's shorthand for, have we already reality tested whether or not this needs more attention? Or like, do you need assurance, right? Not reassurance, but do you need like an outside perspective on this? Because that's valid and important. Not all assurance is bad. It's when it becomes repetitive that it's a problem. And so that's her basically saying, all right, like, where are we at with this? What's the lowdown? Are we in the phase where we need to just talk it through and see how it makes sense to behave in response to this thought? Or should we dive right into exposure hour, basically?
Okay.
Which is actually something that we've talked about before.
Yes.
Exposure hour.
Most friends will go to happy hour. No, we're going to exposure hour.
Exposure hour.
Totally fine. So I like that. That brings up that difference between assurance and reassurance. Like, assurance is good, assurance education, assurance needed in life, right?
Yes.
I know Sally Winston, Marty Seifert, they write about that all the time. Assurance versus reassurance. And that's what the reframe is. When you're dealing with that sort of OCD flare up. Like, okay.
Yeah.
Do we need to get on that ground, or have we already done that and now we got to go directly to the
source?
Okay.
Yeah.
And
no, that's absolutely it.
Yeah. How would you know? Like, how do I know? The answer to that would be like, yeah, I'm pretty sure this is one of those intrusive thoughts and I need to work on it as such.
Yeah. So, generally speaking, if I've already talked with somebody else about it, like let's say I still see a therapist
Sure.
with, maybe once a month just to check in. So, let's say I've talked to my therapist about it already. I'll be like, I like that tells me maybe I don't need to run the content by somebody again. Maybe especially we've sort of come to a conclusion if I'm wanting to bring it back up, that's a sign that maybe getting a reframe, getting some cognitive restructuring support from a friend isn't necessarily in my best interest. And I think it actually brings up a really interesting point, which is early in recovery. I'm sure you see this all the time.
Mhm.
Uh, People often are like, yes, reassurance, give me reassurance all the time. And I think one of the things that hopefully happens in the recovery process is that you start to realize that maybe I don't want that. Right? Like maybe that's not going to benefit me.
Mhm.
So you can gauge it yourself, and that's I think something that is required in order for that kind of question from a friend to work. Is that sort of self honesty?
Yeah, I mean, that's experience. That's only going to come with
Mhm.
some experience. Then I take
Absolutely. So at first, it might be quite difficult to check in with yourself and to choose the
it. Yeah.
exposure over the reframe.
So in the beginning, the question, "Can I offer you a reframe?" is usually going to be answered, "Yes, please. Yes, please. Yes, yes. Let's fact check that again." Uh,
Yeah, and if it's too exuberant, maybe maybe that's
well,
not.
that's probably an indicator, right? But I
Yes.
think that's reasonably common, like in my Facebook group, say in my community, where we always have to be careful. Like the group is great and everybody tries to help each other out, but sometimes people forget, like, well, this could be somebody in the beginning stages, so
Yeah.
you can't hammer them on reassurance. This is the first time they're ever asking, so that's okay.
Yeah.
And I'm
Yep.
guessing in a therapeutic setting, it's the same thing. If you're just starting work with somebody, it's not, no, I'm not answering any questions. I will not argue with your irrational fear on your behalf. Uh,
Right.
in the beginning, it's like, no, 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 we can do some fact checking to start this process, and then we
Yep.
must drop this.
That's absolutely it.
Yeah.
It's we start with maybe looking at what makes sense to do, especially with some of the really scary stuff that nobody's ever been able to offer reframes around, right? Like
Mhm.
POCD, for instance, or pedophilia themed intrusive thoughts. People are, they think that they are monsters. That's what happens when they come into treatment. So just acknowledging, hey, these types of thoughts don't make you a bad person is a really important part of the process. Now, if we're 6 months in and it's like, but Lauren, what if this thought this time this is my favorite. This time it feels different.
Yeah.
this this time, then I'm gonna go, well, wait a second. And this is something funny enough that I do with my clients. I'm like, well, look, here's my conundrum. I'm trying to determine whether or not you're asking for reassurance right now, and it sort of seems like you want the answer, even though we've gone over this before.
Mhm.
So I'm reticent. And sometimes it goes even a little further. Like, I'm going to ask you to stop because they're compulsively confessing, right?
Okay.
You know what I'm talking about?
Yes, I do. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, but, and then I'll be like, whoa, 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 wait a second. I can't, like, it's almost like la 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 la, like
Yeah. Yeah.
I
Yeah.
don't want to I don't want to listen because that's harmful to you.
Right.
Um, but one way or another, that beyond that initial moment, like of checking in, it's like it can very easily become problematic.
And so the alternative answer, can I offer a reframe, or are we going into exposure hour, would be
Yep,
like, no, I don't need that reframe. Or you may decide as the therapist, like, no, 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 we've been through this before. You know what this is. So let's start to work on it the productive way,
totally,
which is,
totally.
let's talk about the exposures. I know we've talked about
Yeah,
some before, but
yeah. No, for there's never enough talk about exposures, right?
this is true.
So you go to happy hour with your friend, aka exposure hour,
Exposure hour.
and what does that sound like? That sounds like usually, especially if we're going back to those text messages, it's like, this is uncertainty. Here it is. I don't know. I don't know. I don't know the answer to this question. And it's hard and it's scary. And then it's usually followed up by um, words of encouragement like, you are a badass for sitting with and tolerating discomfort and uncertainty, and
Mm.
usually some gifts, preferably from Napoleon Dynamite.
Wow, I am learning so much today. I feel like I could skip an entire term in my grad program now. Like, I've
There you
heard this
go.
before, and I know about the gifts already. I can skip that course. Credits. Um, no, it's great. But I think what's interesting about that is, okay, so we're not doing the reframe. We're going into exposure hour, and we're going to start exposure hour with literally the I don't know if that's real about you or
Yeah.
not. That's the
Yeah.
very first exposure. Maybe. Does this
That's
mean
usually where I go anyway.
maybe? Yeah.
Yeah.
I think a lot of
Right?
people think, yeah, it makes sense. But a lot of people hear, well, exposure, OCD, I'm going to start doing ERP. So immediately Lauren's going to start giving me, I have to start writing the thoughts down and saying them into a mirror and doing all those things,
Mhm.
running with scissors. But not so much. First, it's the acknowledgement of the uncertainty that you are not really sure about what that thought
Mm.
means. And then maybe we go toward it. Does that sound right?
It does, with the one exception of I think it is more advanced. I don't think that many people early in the process would go straight to that. I think that if I told them to do that, they'd be like, "No, I'm not good with that,
Sit with the
thanks."
uncertainty of not knowing.
Well, just in that sort of brazen a way.
That makes sense.
Do you know? I think it's easier. You mentioned more planned exposures, and it's easier to start out with those.
Mhm.
And then when you find these sort of rogue incidental exposures coming up, you get to respond with these maybes, and really face the uncertainty on purpose. So, I mean, obviously, it's all down to accepting uncertainty, but it's a process and a practice. So, um, not
I
all
guess
in one fell swoop
yeah, and anything
necessarily.
else, you're gonna start small, I would guess. So that makes sense.
Yeah.
So as opposed to just throwing it on the table, sure, you may actually be a, a mass murdering monster.
Right.
That's
Right.
maybe down the road. You can throw that out there as to illustrate the uncertainty because the person understands what that means. But at the beginning,
Totally.
it's probably more of a gentle explanation of like, listen, we have to try to not answer that question.
That's right. Exactly. And I mean it's back to this assurance versus reassurance. I think people early on they think maybe and they hear 50-50. Like, maybe
Yes.
I'm gonna go kill somebody tonight. We'll see,
Yep.
and that's not what we're talking about. We're saying, okay, we've decided on a rational level, this is likely. And we're accepting uncertainty. But that's like a sliver of uncertainty. That's not a it's highly probable that I'm going to go out and do something that's completely against who I want to be.
That's such a good point because there have been so many times when I've told people that, like, listen, the best
Mhm.
answer you could give this is maybe.
Mm.
Just like with health anxiety, which I'm aware of health anxiety, they're taking it that 0.01%. We've talked about this in a past video and turning it into a 60% chance of death.
Totally.
No, 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 no. The statistics are not that, but your fear turns it into that. And I guess the maybe becomes flip a coin.
Yes.
Best of luck to you. Like maybe you're a murderer, maybe you're not. So I do understand that, I guess. It makes sense. Like, no, 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 no. There's a
Yeah.
very tiny, tiny, but I understand your emotional reaction here is blowing that up into certain doom.
Totally.
That's what makes it.
That's it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is what makes it so hard, and it what that because that alarm is going off in your mind, that's why you presume that it is a, 60% chance instead of a 0.01%. Um, so it's
I feel like
learning
it
to
should,
divorce the two, you know?
yeah. No, I was going to say, I feel like I should be paying you for CEUs like ahead of time in this video. But, I didn't think I never thought we'd get here, but in a way, that may be the difference between a thought, like in a non-disordered state, and that
Mm,
disordered thought that would be part of the OCD complex. Like for me, I might think, is there a chance I might be a terrible person? Sure, I guess there's some chance, but then I move on because I understand that
right.
the chance is tiny. I don't know. Yeah, I
Yes.
guess I've made mistakes in my life. I may have hurt some people, but okay,
Yeah.
I can move on from that. Whereas when you're in that disordered state, that becomes overpowered.
Right, because that
Yeah,
feeling comes in and hooks you and says, "No, no, you can't possibly walk away from this."
yeah, it's super important. You have to pay attention
Yes,
to it.
totally.
Let's
Um,
get to the point where why you'd have to ask, do you need a reframe? Because I think, and I see this in my community, although I'm not as heavily OCD oriented as you are naturally. How do I know? Even though I'm down the road a bit, I'm having a new thought, and I'm not sure this is part of my OCD. Is that the issue that you're addressing with? Can I offer you a reframe?
hmm, I think maybe to some degree, like,
Okay.
or it's so I have an interest in like I want to dialogue with you about this. I think because I think a lot of people will say like, well, is it my OCD? Is it my panic disorder? Is it my anxiety? And I think that that's too simple. And people want to make it that black and white. People want to be like, oh, well, that's just my panic disorder. I can ignore that.
Mhm.
But in the moment, the reality is that it's down to here's this thought and here's uncertainty. Do you know? And so when we're saying things like that, it's almost like we're saying, is it rational to respond in this way? But I think saying it in those terms is less likely to turn into uh, a problematic form of reassurance, if that makes sense.
It does.
Like,
It actually does make sense.
yeah.
Yeah.
Because calling things like, oh, it's just an OCD thought or it's just an anxiety thought is a quick way to just, and it's rarely that simple.
It's a thought, and there are probably multiple elements in that thought.
Right.
It's a thought that anybody might have, which is true, and you can
Right.
accept that. But there's also that sort of disordered part of the thought that's the part you're working on.
Well, right. And the response to the thought, I think, is where that lies. And I think it's especially true for things like health anxiety. It's not a health anxiety thought. It's that you're having a thought about your health. And in response to that, you want to go, next level with trying to make sure that feared outcome doesn't come to pass.
Mhm.
Um, but linking that back, because I think that was linked in, but now of course my brain is,
No,
all the meandering.
I could sort of link it back, I think. So really, the question, is this an OCD thought? Is this part of my OCD or my panic disorder, is probably best answered in, well, what do you feel the need to do right now? Do
Yes.
you
And
feel
how
the
does it
Yeah,
go
do I
ahead?
is this important? Am I supposed to work on it? Should I address this directly, the content? Okay, then it's probably.
Yes,
Yeah,
that's it. It's like, does it make sense to respond to this right now?
right, right.
And that answer may change too. That's the thing about that is it's not, you know, it's not, oh, well, it's uh not doesn't make sense to go to a doctor right now, so it never makes sense to go to a doctor. It's like right now I don't have that information and it probably makes sense to just wait and see what happens,
Which
you
would be
know?
in the case of, say, a health anxiety thought, or
Exactly.
right. I
Yeah.
was trying to tell people, are you feeling a thing now, or are you worried that you might feel a thing?
Right.
Yeah, which
Yeah.
is, I guess, that, so that probably holds true with across all the spectrum, even in OCD. Like, well, what's the situation right now? I'm just unsure whether this thought says something about me. And so I'm
Yeah.
feeling compelled to guarantee that it doesn't. Well, that's
Yes.
probably an indicator that it isn't OCD thought.
Right.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah, totally. So that's what we're looking for is like uh, on based on odds, based on what seems likely with our rational minds, which is hard when you've got the feelings, but everyone can access it. Like, what would you tell someone else? Would you tell somebody else that they're in a really bad spot, or would you tell somebody else that they could probably wait it out? Like uh, what kind of advice would you give? That usually helps people to key into what actually makes sense, or what do you think another person in these circumstances would do? Do you think that they would respond by
Yeah.
doing whatever X, Y, and Z? um yeah.
I dig that, because people, I know in the panic disorder community, and you see this every day, people are lovely. They're trying to help each other, and they can give each other good advice, and then, scratch their heads and say, why can't I take my own advice? Does it
Yeah,
hold true in the OCD community as well?
totally.
Somebody
Yes.
can give you great advice for
Yeah.
your OCD, but
Right.
yeah,
Like, why would you do that? That sounds horrible. Like, that doesn't make any sense. And then it's like, but this feels different. This
yeah.
is
But I think that's that bias. It comes from inside me, so therefore it's automatically important.
Well, what's interesting too is I don't know if you see this in the community that you work with, but it's almost with OCD because it flip flops so much between different ideas or concepts or themes. Sometimes people can have a lot of objectivity around a theme that's not currently being hit upon,
Right.
right?
By them, it's not their theme at the moment.
At the moment, but
Right.
it was maybe like a week ago, and then it'll flip-flop, right? So they'll then go back to that theme, and then all of a sudden they're like, why was I ever worried about that thing?" So I think that can happen in lots of different forms of anxiety.
Oh, it happens in the panic disorder and agoraphobia community all the time.
Yep.
So someone will ask about, a rapid heartbeat or something, and someone will invariably chime in with some very helpful advice. Oh, I used to be terrified of that. Now I don't
Mm,
even think about it. But now they're gripped by, it feels like I can't breathe.
Yeah.
And then one day when they're over that, they'll look back and say, "Oh, why was I so worried about that?" So yes, the same exact thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was
Yeah.
terrified of that. Now I don't care. So I'll tell you that I don't care anymore. You're gonna be all right.
Yeah.
But can you please help me with my jelly legs? Because I'm convinced that's certain doom
Because
now.
that's for
Come on,
sure
let's
gonna be
get
the
to
enemy.
the day. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
brains are so
Man,
brilliant, but so strange also.
it's those feelings, man. They'll get you every time.
Freaking feelings, man.
Freaking feelings. Do you
100%
know there's
true.
there's a book called F Feelings?
Yeah, and I know that became super popular for a while, like writing books with the word Fuck in the title. Like, I feel like I should have wrote one, but I missed that wave. It's all right.
It's
Um,
okay. Maybe, it'll come back. You
it'll come
can
back like skinny ties. It'll come back.
it'll come back around.
Um, yeah, that's really true. One thing that I think is interesting when you say it's those feelings, man. I am fascinated by this. This is not a question. It's not anything. It's just me waxing over this thing. I always find it amazing with almost any feeling or thought. If I say something ridiculous to me, to you, you can
Mhm,
dismiss that instantaneously. We do it in religion and politics. And what's the
mm.
best baseball team? Like we dismiss other people's thoughts as ridiculous in an instant and walk away from them. But thoughts that come from inside us, we do not have the ability, or we are conditioned to think, I should not dismiss this thought because it's
Mhm.
inside me.
Yeah,
How could that be? How have we conditioned ourselves? And I don't know. I'm really going to look into this. Is this true across multiple cultures worldwide, or is it just a Western problem?
yeah.
What is it? That'd be fascinating for me to figure that out one day.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting question, and I think it's got to have at least some small part to do with it's in my voice, so it must mean something. Like, it must be reflective of something that I believe,
Yeah.
um, because we see that in just in terms of prioritizing values that are not your own as well,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
That you get
If it's not, it doesn't hurt me, then I don't care about it. We see that now.
well, no, I mean, like, taking on so I'm thinking about in the context of eating disorders,
Mhm.
particularly, like, assuming the cultural, sort of the importance that you're placing on, body image,
Okay.
even though that's not what you believe is rationally the most important thing in the world, because there's such an emphasis placed on it in the culture that you're brainwashed, right? You're absorbing that belief because it's been sort of repeated to you over and over and over again. So you can see somebody else's worth isn't tied to that, but your worth
Mhm.
becomes, do you know what I mean? Like, still it's tied to it.
That makes perfect sense. And the brainwashing. So body image is a perfect example of that, I guess. That can fuel
Yeah.
that body dysmorphic problem or eating disorder. But I think the same holds true in the case of the things that you and I are addressing on a daily basis. I
Yep.
can't tell you how difficult it is sometimes. And this ties back to, do you need a reframe? Like, is this a thing you really have to worry about? You're having a thought or you're experiencing an emotion. Like, it
Yeah.
seems incredulous for people to think, oh, I can disregard my own emotion. Is that
Right.
even possible? Because I think to a certain extent, we are somewhat brainwashed.
Totally.
No, 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 you must
Absolutely.
honor, you must delve, you must find meaning, this is your inner voice, your soul is speaking. Those could be
Right.
damaging. I mean, they're not bad statements, but when they go off the rails in our community.
But they are. I don't know. I have feelings about this, because
Me too.
I love Daniel Kahneman, and all of his work around biases and heuristics, and our brains are flawed, like, deeply flawed. And so saying something to someone like, "Just trust your gut," it's like, don't know. Don't why would you do that? Like, it did not turn out well for Romeo and Juliet, okay? Like, it's probably not gonna turn out and it might, right? Sometimes it will, but
Right.
I think trusting your gut without incorporating rationality is a terrible idea.
In
Right.
general, not just
Yes,
in an anxiety context.
completely.
I do not disagree. But you and I are very similar, I think, in personality. I agree with you 100%. I
Yeah.
literally did a 45-minute rant on that 2 years ago on my podcast. Why trusting
Really?
is a terrible idea, especially for people that we're addressing on a daily basis. That's the
Totally.
worst advice that there could possibly be. Trust your gut. Go with your intuition. It's telling you something. No, no, no.
Totally.
It's epically wrong every single day in this context.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And people, I think, in our communities as well, that confidence is conflated with certainty. And so,
Mm,
you've got this, you're after this feeling too that doesn't
not gonna
it's
get-
not real. It's not like, it doesn't tell you anything, because people can be totally confident and totally wrong. So on one side, it's like, don't necessarily, yeah, I know all the
I'm
time.
confident all the time, and I'm wrong about a shit ton of stuff. So yeah,
Yeah, no, totally,
yeah.
totally. So,
I get it.
yeah.
Interesting conversation, and I think it all plays together in a way. But can I offer you a reframe? Which started the whole thing was a brilliant, brilliant thing for me to hear. I felt like it was sort of eavesdropping on a conversation that I wasn't supposed to be, but there was so much insight in there that I really appreciate that. We should have got Kelly on to do this with us, I guess, because she
I
gets.
know. Well, maybe she can come on next month.
Yeah, we'll
She's
bring her on next
yeah,
month. It's totally
for
fine. You guys
sure.
will dig her. But yeah,
Yeah.
can I offer a reframe? So let's sum it up here. When
Yep.
you're confronted with this scary thought, your two
Mm,
choices are: do I need to test the content of this thought, which would be
mm,
the reframe, right?
yep.
Or
Or do I need to face the uncertainty head on and just feel all of the discomfort associated with not knowing without trying to figure it out?
right, because I'm not going to seek certainty on the content of this thought. I'm just gonna leave it be.
Right? I'm just going to let it sort of float there nebulously in the ether.
Tough
Blah.
spot. So yeah, it's a
That's
tough spot.
yeah.
Yeah, tough spot. I get that. I really do. I see people struggle with it every day. And then we
Yeah.
did one early on of these. If you go to my YouTube channel to the like the Fire and Ice playlist, that has a
I love that we have a playlist.
I think
Okay.
you'll see we did one called to ERP or not ERP. Like when do you
Mm,
actually go toward this with the ERP exercises, repeating, writing it down, blah, blah, all that
yeah.
stuff. When do you do that? Because at some point that could become part of your kind of your reframe, or do you want an exposure?
Yeah.
And that exposure could be doing some of that work, which we talked about it in another video. So
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. It's always so fun talking to you. You have so many wonderful insights. I always learn so much as
Well, we
we
never have a shortage of words, that's for sure.
Some people may wish we did.
Maybe. We came up with this literally like via text message an hour ago. Like, hey, let's talk
Yeah,
about that. And I knew we could keep going, but we
I
try
know, it's
these at
true.
about 25 to 30 minutes. So
Yeah.
anyway, if you guys are watching on YouTube, just so you can keep commenting, I will try and answer them as best I can. If I have to drag Lauren in to answer one at some point, I will. But otherwise, go check out Lauren on Instagram right there
Um,
at the Obsessive Mind. Um,
and
do I have to put me up? It's not
yep,
myself up.
put put
You
Drew.
yeah, I'm at a point because I got the left side of the screen.
Yeah, you point. That's good. That's yeah, go check out Drew. He's wonderful and marvelous. Oh, and his podcast, Hello, also called The Anxious Truth. Excellent. Lots of resources there. So,
Thank you. I
yay.
appreciate that. We're gonna have
Mhm.
to do one of those things where you do like what are they like a TikTok or an Instagram takeover, but we could do a
Whoa.
podcast takeover. So one day
Whoa.
you're gonna tune into the Anxious Truth and you're gonna hear Lauren and Kelley maybe.
Whoa. And then you'll just do purely OCD. I love this.
You're like, oh, what have I got myself into?
We're so hip. I'm very impressed with us
We
right
are
now.
incredibly hip.
I mean,
We are sitting at the cool kids table now. So
obviously.
stopping us. All right, guys. Thanks for hanging in there with us. I appreciate it. We'll see you, I guess, next month. We'll do it again like we always do.
Sounds good. Thanks for joining.
Right.